So I asked you a challenging question, which I have thought of a lot. I fully acknowledge the damage my generation has done to this country and continues to do. Joe Biden is a boomer. And the question arises, did the generation that raised them, or does the generation that raised them, which is called the greatest generation, do they bear any responsibility?
This is a question that I get a lot, and I suppose it's only fair. I've written a book where the millennials blame the boomers for their problems, so it's only fair to ask whether we can put a little bit of the blame for the boomers on the people who raised them. But my answer is that really you can't. The blame stops with the boomers, and I'll tell you why. The reason why the boomers are the way they are is not so much how they were raised, but a product of the demographic fact that the boomers are an exceptionally large generation. I mean, it's right there in the name, the baby boomers. It was a birth boom, which meant that from the moment they came of age in the 1960s, the boomers have been the most numerous consumers, music listeners, voters. Anybody who wanted their project to be a success would target it to the boomers and their desires. If you were a politician and wanted to win, you would court the baby boomers simply because there were so many of them. The consequence of that was that it gave the baby boomers the idea that the world revolved around them. So much of the boomer legacy is a product of their narcissism. But that wasn't because the greatest generation spoiled them when they were coming up. It was because of this demographic fact, which has had just a lot of follow-on consequences.
Is there a repeat of this? I just vaguely recall reading that there's I don't know if it's a baby boom, since a lot of people are not having babies, but is there some sort of repeat in the staggering number of either millennials or Generation X or Z or whatever? Or is that wrong?
Very recently, we crossed the threshold point where millennials now outnumber baby boomers, mainly because so many baby boomers have, driven themselves into an early grave through misdeeds of one kind or another. And it is true that the millennials are also a pretty big generation demographically because they are the baby boomers' children. And so the main consequence of that, unfortunately, has been that the generation between them, Gen X, so often gets sidelined because there just are not so many of them. So you'll talk to a lot of Gen Xers who feel kind of left behind and left out, and that's the reason behind that there were a lot of baby boomers, and their kids are the millennials, and so there are a lot of them too, but the Gen Xers just get caught in the middle.
So you chose a number of people. Oh, by the way, I think I should give you my theory as a baby boomer, because I was already speaking when I was in my 20s, so I recall audience reactions, and I recall what I said publicly. And I used to say to audiences, obviously this was the greatest generation, as they say, audience, the people who went through the Depression and World War II. And I say, you know what? You say you're going to give us everything you didn't have, meaning material, wealth, security, and so on. And that's great, but you didn't give us what you did have, and that was religion and love of this country. So I do hold them unintentionally responsible. They were so preoccupied with giving my generation security and wealth. I don't mean large sums of money, but material items, that they forgot to give us what made America great for all its years. How does that strike you?
That sounds absolutely correct. One of the great resentments that I have as a millennial is that it's against boomer hypocrisy. They were the ones who taught us that America was a terrible country and had been racist from its very founding. And I think older people sometimes don't appreciate that for millennials, that line that America is terrible isn't something that we heard from the occasional dissident faculty radical. That was orthodoxy. That was what we were taught in our mainstream public school history classes. And, of course, the natural response from the millennials is, okay, if America's so terrible, what is good about our country? And the people who were teaching us said, well, America started being good around the time of the 1960s. But if you think about it, what that means is that the baby boomers took love of America and replaced it with love of themselves. So once again, the baby boomers' narcissism put themselves at the center of, according to them, the only good story to be told about the United States. And it's certainly my hope that millennials can be the generation of backlash against that and
God
rediscovering
willing,
what makes.
I got to take a break. Helen Andrews, the book is Boomers, up at DennisPrager.com.